This is Land of Havilah. In this recording, we'll read the entire book of Job and add some comments as usual. We read from the World English Bible because it's not copyrighted and it's very accurate to the original Hebrew. We got our name Land of Havilah from Genesis chapter 2. It's a place with all the ingredients for a full, abundant life. Job's the 18th book of the Old Testament and the first of the books of wisdom and poetry. For anyone new to the Bible, we recommend starting with the New Testament, then going to the Old. You can scroll down our website at landofhavilah.net to see what New Testament books we have, or scroll down on your podcast app. Now the very interesting beginning to the book of Job, verse 1. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, and one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His possessions also were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the children of the East. Comment: there's no statement in the first 3 verses or anywhere else in the book that would give a clue about authorship. It's completely anonymous. In verse 1, Job lived in the land of Uz, which we can't locate, but according to verse 3, it was east. East of what? We don't know. But generally in the Old Testament, east means somewhere east of the Promised Land. Job's heritage and nationality are also a mystery, but since Uz was the firstborn of Aram in the genealogy of Genesis 10, perhaps we could think of Job as Aramaic or Syrian. There's nothing in the book to make us think he's connected to Israel or to Abraham. He's just a generic man out there making his way the only way he knows how, choosing to live in the fear of God in verse 1. His God is Yahweh, coming up in verse 6. In verse 3, Job was one of the greatest men of the East, meaning he was rich and well regarded. Verse 3 gives a numeric account of his children, flocks, and herds. At the end of the book, we'll be turning back to these numbers, and we'll discover a very mind-blowing teaching about the afterlife. For now, we'll just file it away and save it for then. As far as there being harmony in Job's family, verse 4, his sons went and held a feast in the house of each one on his birthday, and they sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and to drink with them. It was so when the days of their feasting had run their course that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and renounced God in their hearts." Job did so continually. Comment in verse 4, Job's children all got along and kept up with each other by feasting together in a different house at every birthday. Psalm 133:1, quote, "See how good and pleasant it is for brothers to dwell together in unity," end quote. It was no doubt good and pleasant for Job to see his children celebrating each other. We wonder if they had their own Middle Eastern version of the Happy Birthday song. Job didn't take anything for granted in verse 5. This righteous fellow made constant appeal to God for his family. Many of us have been prayed into the kingdom of God by grandparents like Job. Now switching scenes to events in heaven, verse 6. Now on the day when God's sons came to present themselves before Yahweh, Satan also came among them. Comment: God's sons in verse 6 and also later in chapter 38, verse 7, seem to be angels. They were presenting themselves to Yahweh, and Satan came in. Verse 7. Yahweh said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Then Satan answered Yahweh and said, "From going back and forth in the earth and from walking up and down in it." Yahweh said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? For there's no one like him in the earth, a blameless and an upright man, one who fears God and turns away from evil." Then Satan answered Yahweh and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Haven't you made a hedge around him and around his house and around all that he has on every side? You blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But stretch out your hand now and touch all that he has, and he'll renounce you to your face." Yahweh said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your power. Only on himself don't stretch out your hand." So Satan went out from the presence of Yahweh. Comment: verse 7, Satan told Yahweh he had been going back and forth and walking up and down in the earth. Satan was doing his usual thing, seeking whom he might devour. 1 Peter 5:8. In verse 8, Yahweh gave Job the highest of compliments, that there was no one like him in the earth, that he was blameless, upright, feared God, and turned away from evil. This obviously gratified Yahweh, which is a stunning thing to think about, that a man or woman could gratify God. In verse 11, Satan accused Job in the theory that if God would stop protecting him, Job would get angry with God and renounce him. In Revelation 12:10, Satan accuses us before God day and night. Our world will turn on whether we keep blessing God or renounce him. Then in verses 9 to 12, we can either take offense to our troubles or we can give God his due, that he can do with us whatever he wants and still be justified in it. It's been the case for millions that they've seen human misery on the earth and renounced God. Or we can take the righteous approach, give God his due, that he's good, he's just, and whatever we don't understand, that's exactly what it is. It's something we don't understand. And God will eventually reward us for every hardship so long as we endure it in faith. God is God, and we're not. There's no point in faith if things are always smooth, and without faith it's impossible to please God, Hebrews 11:6. Therefore, hardship is a chance to exercise faith and a chance to please God. The worse the hardship, the greater the chance of pleasing him. In verse 12, God gave Satan permission, but not to attack Job's person. It's one of the most unforgettable, dramatic setups in the Bible because we know Satan's about to test Job to his limit. We're rooting for Job to keep blessing God and not renounce him. So what did Satan do to him? Verse 13. It fell on a day when his sons and his daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, that there came a messenger to Job and said, The oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans attacked and took them away. Yes, they've killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Comment, some Sabaean raiders, who the Sabaeans are we don't know, killed Job's herdsmen in the field and stole his oxen and donkeys. Only one servant lived to tell what happened. Verse 16. While he was still speaking, there also came another and said, The fire of God has fallen from the sky and has burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Comment, Job's sheep and shepherds are wiped out. Only one servant lived to tell about it. We can't blame it on man this time. It was fire from heaven. Verse 17. While he was still speaking, there came also another, and said, The Chaldeans made 3 bands and swept down on the camels and have taken them away, yes, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Comment, the camels and all their herdsmen except one are gone. Verse 18. While he was still speaking, there came also another, and said, Your sons and your daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young men, and they're dead. I alone have escaped to tell you. Comment, the sons and daughters died in a violent windstorm. They were feasting in peace, and the house collapsed. Verse 20. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head, and fell down on the ground and worshipped. He said, Naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. Yahweh gave, and Yahweh has taken away. Blessed be Yahweh's name. In all this, Job didn't sin nor charge God with wrongdoing. Comment, in verse 21, Job didn't get angry with God because the way he figured it, he only broke even. He came into the world with nothing, and he'll lose it all anyway because he'll leave it with nothing in death. His capping statement was, Blessed be Yahweh's name, which was to his credit, but we see many today renouncing God because of evil. It's a ruthless way to treat God, which calls for a ruthlessly honest response, which is anyone who's experienced evil and charges God on the basis of it is a hypocrite. If life for them was really all that bad, they would go ahead and kill themselves. By suffering hardship and continuing to live, they testify that they appreciate the life God gave them. It's a ruthless way to put it, but let's be frank. Now, some do kill themselves and testify that life on balance isn't worth living, but please, no one should make that choice because the majority of us are correct that the life God gave us is worth living, and suicide's a forever response to a temporary situation. God's there to fulfill His promise, quote, "For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, says Yahweh, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you hope and a future." Jeremiah 29:11. In any misery we experience, let's say, "Blessed be God." Job 2 is next.